The research camp along the Rio Negro was quiet until the screaming started. Dr. Evelyn Rhodes dropped her coffee mug as Jude Wells' voice exploded through the radio. "The cub's in the water! He's in the water!" No one had time to think. Within seconds, the entire team was sprinting toward the riverbank, boots pounding mud, branches slapping faces. But when they reached the edge, they all stopped cold. A tiny white tiger cub thrashed in the brown current, his icy blue eyes wide with terror as the river dragged him downstream. His mother stood on the ridge above, roaring so loudly the trees seemed to shake. She paced frantically, claws tearing into bark, but the drop was too steep. She couldn't reach him. The cub's head disappeared beneath the surface once, twice, each time staying under longer. "We have to do something," Jude shouted, reaching for his safety rope. Dr. Rhodes grabbed his arm hard. "You go in there, you won't make it. Piranhas, caiman, the current." Her voice cracked. She was right, and everyone knew it. They could only watch. The cub resurfaced, gasping for air, tiny paws clawing at nothing. Then the water around him began to ripple differently. Something was moving beneath. Jude's camera caught it first. A massive caiman gliding closer, only its eyes visible above the murky surface. "No, no, no," someone whispered. The mother's roar turned desperate, almost human in its anguish. That's when the jungle went silent. Every bird stopped calling. Every insect paused. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. The research team turned as one toward the sound of something large pushing through the underbrush. Leaves exploded apart, and a spectacled bear stepped into view. Maddox. The same bear who'd been raiding their supply crates for weeks, the one they'd nicknamed the Breakfast Thief. He was massive, water still dripping from his dark fur like he'd just climbed out of the river himself. He stared directly at the drowning cub. Not at the researchers, not at the mother tiger, just the cub. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. But what this bear does next breaks every rule of nature and forces scientists to question everything they thought they understood about the wild. Before we dive into this unbelievable rescue, hit that subscribe button because this story gets even more intense. Seriously, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. We want to know how far this incredible moment reaches. 3 weeks earlier, this white tiger family didn't even know the Amazon existed. They'd spent their entire lives in Montana, inside the carefully controlled climate of the Glacier Ridge Sanctuary, where the air was dry and thin, where snow fell 6 months a year, and where their biggest concern was which enrichment toy the keepers would bring next. The mother, a magnificent white tigress named Kailani, had raised her 2 cubs in a world of predictability. Feeding times never changed. Temperatures stayed comfortable. Danger didn't exist. Then, everything changed overnight. Dr. Evelyn Rhodes stood in the cargo area of the transport plane, one hand gripping an overhead strap, the other clutching a medical kit she prayed she wouldn't need. Across from her, the massive travel crates rattled with every pocket of turbulence. Inside those crates, Kailani and her cubs were sedated just enough to keep them calm, but not enough to risk respiratory problems at altitude. Evelyn had overseen animal transports before, dozens of them, but never anything like this. Never predators this rare. Never stakes this high. "How much longer?" Jude Wells called from behind his camera, which he'd been pointing at the crates for the last hour. The kid was 26, fresh out of film school, and treated every moment like it deserved documentation. Evelyn found it exhausting and oddly comforting at the same time. 40 minutes to Manaus, then another 2 hours by boat, she said, checking her watch. You should probably save your battery. Jude lowered the camera, but kept his finger near the record button. You think they'll adapt, okay? I mean, Montana to the Amazon it's extreme. Evelyn didn't answer right away. The truth was, she didn't know. Nobody knew. This entire project was unprecedented, a joint conservation effort between U.S. and Brazilian research teams to study how captive-bred white tigers might contribute genetic diversity to isolated populations in protected jungle regions. The science was solid. The ethics had been debated for 2 years. But theory and reality were very different things. And right now, reality was 3 sedated tigers in crates flying toward a rainforest they'd never seen. They'll adapt, Evelyn finally said, more to convince herself than Jude. Or we'll adapt the project. That's why we're here. When the plane landed in Manaus, the heat hit them like a physical wall. Evelyn felt sweat break out across her back within seconds. Jude's camera lens fogged up immediately. Unbelievable. He trailed off, wiping the glass with his shirt. Inside the crates, Kailani stirred, letting out a low, confused growl. The cubs, Nova and Aspen, began mewing, high-pitched sounds that made Evelyn's chest tighten. They were scared. Of course they were scared. The boat ride up the Rio Negro was worse. The river stretched wide and dark, its black water reflecting the canopy overhead like a warped mirror. Howler monkeys screamed from the trees. Birds Evelyn couldn't identify shrieked and dove. The air was so thick with moisture it felt like breathing through a wet towel. Jude filmed everything, his face a mixture of awe and concern. Kailani's growls had turned constant now, a steady rumble of distress that vibrated through the boat's metal floor. She knows something's wrong, Jude said quietly. She knows everything's different, Evelyn corrected. That doesn't mean wrong. But when they finally reached the research camp and began unloading the crates into the specially constructed enclosure, 3 acres of protected jungle surrounded by reinforced barriers, Evelyn felt her confidence waver. The enclosure was as close to natural habitat as they could manage, complete with a freshwater stream, dense vegetation, and elevated platforms for climbing. But it was still the Amazon, still alien, still dangerous in ways Montana never wins. They released Kailani first. She emerged from the crate slowly, every muscle tense, her white coat almost glowing against the dark green foliage. Her head swiveled, taking in the sounds, the smells, the oppressive humidity that made her fur look heavier. For a long moment she just stood there, utterly still. Then she opened her mouth and tasted the air, her expression unreadable. The cubs came next. Nova burst out of her crate like she had been fired from a cannon, immediately pouncing on a fallen branch and wrestling it like prey. She was the bigger of the 2, bold and fearless in the way that made Evelyn both proud and nervous. Aspen, on the other hand, crept out carefully, staying close to the crate's opening. He was smaller, more cautious, his ice-blue eyes taking in every detail of this strange new world. Where Nova saw adventure, Aspen saw uncertainty. "Look at them," Jude whispered, camera rolling. "They're so different." Evelyn nodded. "Nova's going to be the one who gets into trouble. Aspen's the one who will survive it." Over the next few days, the tigers began adjusting, or at least they began trying. The humidity was relentless. Kailani spent hours lying in the stream, something she'd never done in Montana, The insects drove all of them crazy at first. Evelyn watched Nova snap at mosquitoes until she was panting with frustration. The sounds were overwhelming. Constant screaming, howling, buzzing, clicking that never stopped, not even at night. Montana had been quiet. This place was chaos. But slowly, things shifted. Kailani started hunting the simulated targets the team provided with renewed intensity, her instincts sharpening in this wild environment. Nova discovered she could climb higher here than she ever could in Montana, and she spent hours in the canopy platforms, watching birds. And Aspen, careful, curious Aspen, became fascinated with the stream. He'd wade into the shallow parts, dipping his paws, watching the water flow around his legs, studying the way fish darted between rocks. "He loves the water," Jude observed one morning, filming Aspen's careful exploration. "That's going to be important later, right? For their adaptation?" Evelyn smiled. "Everything they learn here is important." She had no idea how true that was, how that curiosity, that fascination with water would soon put Aspen in a situation none of them could have predicted. Because 3 weeks into their Amazon adventure, when the cubs were finally confident enough to explore the far edges of the enclosure, something would go catastrophically wrong. And when it did, the jungle would respond in a way that would change everything. Morning in the Amazon didn't arrive gently. It exploded. By 5:47 a.m., the jungle was already screaming, howler monkeys rattling the canopy, macaws shrieking their territorial claims, insects buzzing in clouds so thick they looked like smoke. Dr. Evelyn Rhodes sat at the observation post with her third cup of coffee, notepad balanced on her knee, watching the tiger family through high-powered binoculars. Jude was beside her, camera already rolling, capturing the soft golden light filtering through the leaves. "Kailani's on the north ridge," Evelyn murmured, scribbling notes without looking down. "Elevated position, scanning pattern consistent with territorial surveillance. Cubs are..." She adjusted the binoculars. "Cubs are near the stream again." Jude zoomed in. "Aspen's obsessed with that water." "This is the 4th morning in a row." He was right. While Nova chased butterflies through the undergrowth, pouncing and missing and pouncing again with boundless energy, Aspen had positioned himself at the stream's edge, staring into the current like it held secrets. The water here wasn't like the gentle flow in the center of the enclosure. This was where the stream curved sharply before connecting to a drainage channel that led, eventually, to the Rio Negro itself. The banks were steep, slick with moss, tangled with exposed roots that looked like gnarled fingers reaching toward the water. "Should we be worried about how close he's getting?" Jude asked. Evelyn lowered her binoculars, studying the terrain. The enclosure had been designed with safety as the top priority. The stream was shallow enough that even a cub couldn't drown in the main section. But this edge, this curve where Aspen kept returning, the water moved faster here. The banks were unstable. She'd flagged it in her initial assessment, but deemed it low risk, since the tigers would naturally avoid dangerous terrain. Except Aspen wasn't avoiding it. He was drawn to it. "Keep filming," Evelyn said. "I want documentation of his behavior patterns." On the ridge above, Kailani shifted her position, her white coat catching the early light. She had been watching the cubs constantly since their arrival, barely sleeping, her maternal instincts on overdrive in this unfamiliar environment. Every sound made her ears swivel. Every shadow made her tense. She trusted nothing here, and Evelyn couldn't blame her. 3 weeks wasn't enough time to feel safe in a place this wild. Nova tumbled past Aspen, somersaulting through fallen leaves, trying to get her brother to play. She batted at his tail. He ignored her, taking another careful step toward the water. His paw touched a moss-covered stone, testing its stability. The stone held. He stepped closer. "There," Jude whispered, adjusting his focus. "See how he's analyzing every step? He's not just curious, he's methodical." Evelyn made another note. It was true. Where Nova operated on pure impulse, Aspen calculated. He'd pause, observe, then act. It made him slower, but it also made him smarter, safer, or so Evelyn had thought. Aspen's next step brought him to the very edge of the bank, where tree roots twisted down into the water like a natural ladder. He stretched his neck, sniffing the spray where the current hit the rocks. His ice-blue eyes tracked something below the surface. Maybe a fish, maybe just the way light bent through the brown water. He extended one paw, dipping it into the stream. The cold shocked him. He yanked his paw back, shaking it violently, and Nova burst into what could only be described as laughter. A series of chuffing sounds that made even Evelyn smile. But Aspen wasn't deterred. He dipped his paw again, this time holding it under longer, letting the current push against his fur. His expression was intense, focused, like he was solving a puzzle only he could see. "He's fearless," Jude said. "He's reckless," Evelyn corrected, though she couldn't hide the fondness in her voice. "There's a difference." Above them, Kailani stood. Something had changed in her posture, a slight stiffening, an alertness that went beyond her usual vigilance. Her head turned toward the forest beyond the enclosure, ears rotating like satellite dishes. Evelyn followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. Just trees, just shadows. Just the endless, living chaos of the jungle. "What you hearing?" Jude asked, lowering his camera slightly. "I don't know. Could be anything. Capybaras, maybe? Or another predator passing through." But Kailani's focus remained locked on that distant section of forest. She took 2 steps down the ridge, positioning herself between the cubs and whatever she'd detected. A low, warning growl rumbled from her chest, quiet enough that the cubs didn't react, but clear enough that Evelyn's instincts flared. "Something's out there," she said, reaching for her radio. Before she could call it in, Nova decided she'd had enough of being ignored. She launched herself at Aspen, hitting him broadside with all the subtlety of a freight train. Aspen yelped in surprise, his feet scrambling for purchase on the slick bank. For a moment, both cubs teetered on the edge, a tangle of white fur and flailing limbs. Then Nova shoved off, using her brother as a springboard to leap back to solid ground. Aspen caught his balance. Barely. His back legs skidded on wet moss, claws digging into soft earth, front paws splayed wide. He froze there, half on the bank, half over the water, his small body trembling with effort. "Jude, are you getting this?" Evelyn's voice was tight. "Every second." Kailani's growl intensified. She started moving down the ridge faster now. But she was 50 yards away, too far to reach him quickly on the uneven terrain. Nova finally seemed to realize what she had done, her playful energy evaporating into concern. She mewed softly, creeping back toward the edge. Aspen shifted his weight, trying to pull himself forward. His right front paw found a root, a thick, sturdy root that seemed solid. He gripped it, began hauling himself up. Relief flooded Evelyn's chest. Then the root moved. Not a lot. Just an inch. Just enough to make Aspen's eyes go wide, his small body go rigid. The root wasn't dead wood. It was something else. Something that had been coiled there, perfectly camouflaged among the other roots, waiting. Jude's camera caught the moment it uncoiled, thick, muscular, patterned in browns and blacks that made it invisible until it moved. An anaconda. Juvenile, probably. But still massive. Still deadly. Oh no, Jude breathed. The snake's head emerged from the tangle of roots, rising slowly, its eyes fixed on the small, white cub trembling at the water's edge. Aspen was trapped between the snake and the current, with his mother too far away and the bank too unstable to run. Kailani roared, not a warning. A sound of pure maternal rage. She charged down the ridge, but the terrain was working against her. Too steep, too tangled, too slow. The anaconda opened its mouth, revealing rows of teeth designed to ensure nothing escapes. And Aspen, curious little Aspen who'd only wanted to understand the water, realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Before we continue, you and most people watching right now might never see another video from this channel. All because you forgot to subscribe. So please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. It is literally the only way you tell me that the hours researching, writing, and editing these stories was worth it. Now, let's get back to the story. Aspen's instinct kicked in before his brain could catch up. He lunged backward, away from the anaconda's gaping mouth, his small body twisting in mid-air. His back claws scraped desperately against the moss-covered bank, trying to find anything solid, anything that would hold. For half a heartbeat, he thought he'd made it. His left paw caught something, a root, a rock, he couldn't tell, and his weight shifted back toward safety. Then the entire section of bank gave way beneath him. The soil didn't crack or crumble. It just released, like the earth had been waiting for this exact moment to let go. Centuries of rainwater had hollowed out the substrate beneath the moss and roots, creating a thin shell that looked solid but was anything but. Aspen's small body punched through it like paper, and suddenly he was sliding, fast, uncontrolled, straight down the muddy slope toward the rushing water below. He didn't have time to cry out, didn't have time to think. The world became a blur of brown and green, his claws raking uselessly through soft mud, his body picking up speed with every foot he dropped. The anaconda disappeared above him, the sky tilted, and then the cold hit him like a physical blow. The current seized him immediately. 1 second he was falling, the next he was underwater, tumbling, the force of the stream ripping him downstream before he could even orient himself. His lungs burned. His eyes couldn't process the murky chaos around him. Which way was up? Where was the shore? He kicked frantically, and his head broke the surface for just a moment, long enough to gulp air, long enough to see his mother's white form appear at the ridge edge, and then the current yanked him back under. "Aspen!" Jude's scream cut through the morning air, his camera swinging wildly as he tried to track the cub's location. But the water was too fast, too opaque. 1 second Aspen was visible, a small white shape thrashing against brown water. The next he'd vanished completely around the bend. "I lost him," Jude shouted, already running along the observation deck, trying to keep pace with the current. "Evelyn, I can't see him." Dr. Evelyn Rhodes was already on her feet, radio pressed to her mouth, her voice clipped and controlled despite the ice flooding her veins. "All units, we have a cub in the water. Aspen is in the drainage channel heading toward the Rio Negro connection. I repeat, cub in the water, moving fast downstream." The radio exploded with panicked responses. Team members from different sections of the camp began converging on the stream, but everyone knew the same terrible truth. The drainage channel was designed to prevent flooding during heavy rains, which meant it was deep, fast, and led directly to the main river. Once Aspen reached that junction, he'd be swept into the Rio Negro proper, into water so vast and dark and full of predators that even adult tigers wouldn't survive. On the ridge, Kailani didn't hesitate. She launched herself down the steep incline, taking the most direct route toward where her cub had disappeared. But the terrain that had slowed her before now became actively dangerous. The slope was nearly vertical in places, covered in loose soil and exposed roots that shifted under her weight. Her massive paws slipped, sending rocks and debris cascading down. She roared again, a sound so primal, so filled with anguish that it made Jude's hands shake on his camera. "She can't make it down," Evelyn said, watching through binoculars as Kailani reached a sheer drop-off and skidded to a stop. "The ridge is too steep. She'd have to go around, and by then—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Nova stood at the top of the ridge where the bank had collapsed, staring down at the water below, her body rigid with confusion. She mewed, a sound so small, so helpless that it cut through all the chaos. Her brother had been there, right there beside her, and now he was just gone. Jude reached the southern observation point, gasping for breath, and swung his camera toward the water. His lens caught movement, a flash of white maybe 30 yards downstream, surfacing and disappearing in rapid succession. "There, I've got visual." But even as he said it, he knew they were just watching, just documenting. The protocol was clear. Human personnel did not enter the water under any circumstances. The Rio Negro system was home to piranhas, electric eels, parasitic fish, caiman, anacondas, and a dozen other species that could overpower a swimmer in minutes. Jumping in to save a cub would only result in a double tragedy. Still, Jude felt his body move toward the bank before Evelyn's hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Don't even think about it," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't help him. Nobody can." "We're just going to watch him be swept away?" Jude's voice cracked. "We're going to document what happens," Evelyn said, though every word felt like swallowing glass. "That's our job." Downstream, Aspen surfaced again, his small head barely visible above the churning water. His paws flailed weakly, exhaustion already setting in. He'd traveled almost 50 yards in less than 30 seconds, carried by a current that showed no mercy. His ice-blue eyes were wide with terror, his mouth open in silent cries that no one could hear over the roar of the stream. Kailani paced along the ridge, following her cub's trajectory, but unable to reach him. She roared continuously now, a sound that echoed through the entire research camp, bringing people running from every direction. But running wouldn't help. Watching wouldn't help. Nothing would help. The drainage channel curved sharply ahead, disappearing into thick vegetation. Beyond that curve was the connection point, where the channel emptied into a shallow inlet of the Rio Negro. If Aspen reached that junction, he'd be swept into open water. And in open water, he wouldn't last 5 minutes. Jude's camera tracked the cub's desperate struggle, zooming in on those blue eyes, that small body fighting against impossible odds. His finger trembled on the record button, tears streaming down his face. Every instinct screaming at him to do something, anything, even though he knew. "Wait," Evelyn said suddenly, her binoculars locked on something downstream. "What is that?" Jude swung his camera to follow her gaze. Through his viewfinder, he could see the water's surface changing texture about 20 yards ahead of Aspen's position. ripples moving against the current. Shadows beneath the surface, multiple shapes converging on the same location where the current was carrying the exhausted cub. "Oh no," Jude whispered. "Oh no, no, no." The piranhas had sensed the disturbance. Do you think Aspen has any chance of survival? Let us know in the comments, and share this with someone who needs to see what happens next, because the jungle isn't done yet. The piranhas arrived like a storm beneath the surface. Jude's camera captured the moment the water erupted around Aspen. Dozens of sleek silver bodies breaking the surface in a feeding frenzy that turned the brown water white with foam. The cub thrashed violently, trying to escape something he couldn't see, couldn't understand. His small body spun in the current, carried faster now by the chaos of fish bodies slamming into him from every direction. "They're going to overwhelm him," Jude choked out, his lens shaking so badly the footage blurred. But then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the piranhas scattered. They dispersed in all directions like they'd hit an invisible wall, their bodies flashing in the sunlight as they fled back into deeper water. Aspen bobbed to the surface, coughing, still moving, still alive. "What just happened?" Jude asked. Evelyn's face had gone pale. "They don't usually retreat like that. Something scared them off." She raised her binoculars, scanning the water around the cub. Something bigger. On the ridge, Nova had moved to the exact spot where her brother had fallen. She pawed frantically at the collapsed earth, her small body trembling as she mewed over and over. A desperate, heartbroken sound that made Evelyn's throat tighten. The cub didn't understand why her brother wouldn't come back. Didn't understand why her mother was roaring instead of fixing this. All Nova knew was that Aspen was gone, and the world had become terrifying. Kailani had stopped pacing. She stood perfectly still on the ridge, her entire body coiled tight, her eyes tracking her cub's movement downstream. Every muscle was tensed, ready to launch, but there was nowhere to launch to. The drop was too steep, the terrain too unstable. She'd tried twice more to descend and nearly fallen herself both times. Now she just watched, making a sound Evelyn had never heard from a tiger before. A keening, almost human wail of helplessness. "We have to do something," said Roderick Stevens, the camp's wildlife coordinator, as he reached the observation point. He was already stripping off his shirt, reaching for the emergency rope kit. "We can't just let him go?" "Stop." Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. "Nobody goes in that water. That's an order." "He's drowning." "And you will too." Evelyn grabbed Roderick's arm, forcing him to look at her. "You saw what just happened. Something made those piranhas scatter. Something big enough to scare an entire school. You jump in there, you won't make it before you reach him." Roderick jerked his arm free, his face twisted with anguish. "So we do nothing?" "We document," Evelyn said, though the words felt like acid in her mouth. "We observe. That's the protocol." "Protocol!" Jude spun on her, his camera dangling from one hand. "That's a baby down there. He's terrified and exhausted and—" "I know!" Evelyn's voice shattered the air between them. Her hands were shaking, her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. "You think I don't know? You think this doesn't destroy me? But if any of us go in that water, we won't survive. And we won't save Aspen. So we stay here. And we watch. And we pray something changes." The terrible silence that followed was broken only by Kailani's wails and Nova's mewing and the rush of the current carrying Aspen farther from safety with every passing second. Downstream, The cub's strength was failing. His head stayed above water for shorter periods now, his paws moving sluggishly. He had been fighting the current for nearly 3 minutes, an eternity for something so small. His ice-blue eyes had lost their sharp focus, glazing over with exhaustion and shock. He drifted toward the left bank where vines hung down into the water, thick ropes of vegetation that might offer salvation if he could just reach them. "Come on," Jude whispered, raising his camera again with shaking hands. "Come on, buddy. Grab the vines. Just grab them." Aspen's body turned in the current, bringing him closer to the trailing vegetation. His small paw reached out, claws extended, grasping for anything solid. He caught a vine, actually caught it, and for one beautiful moment his descent stopped. He clung there, his body stretched between the vine and the current, water rushing around him but not carrying him away. "He's got it!" Roderick shouted. "He's holding on." But the vine was slick with algae and moisture, and Aspen's claws were designed for gripping fur and flesh, not plant material. Even as they watched, his paw began to slip. He wrapped his other front leg around the vine, trying to climb, but he had no leverage, no strength left. His back legs kicked uselessly in the current. Kailani roared again, louder this time, and began racing along the ridge, following the tree line, looking for any way down. But every path led to the same impossible drop, the same steep terrain that would claim her before she reached the water. Nova had stopped mewing. She sat motionless at the collapsed bank, staring downstream, her small body rigid, watching her brother struggle. "Please," Jude whispered, his camera still recording even as tears ran down his face. "Please, somebody help him." Aspen's grip failed. His claws raked down the vine, leaving small tears in the vegetation. And then he was in the current again, tumbling, spinning, his head going under and staying under for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. He surfaced, gasping, 20 yards farther downstream. But his movements were barely coordinated now. His paws moved in slow, dreamy circles, like he was forgetting what they were supposed to do. The current was winning. Simple physics was winning. A 70-pound cub against thousands of gallons of water moving at 8 miles per hour. There was only one possible outcome. "I can't watch this," Roderick said, turning away. "I can't." "Then don't," Evelyn said softly, her binoculars still pressed to her eyes. "But I have to. Someone has to witness this." Jude's lens followed Aspen as he drifted around another bend, his small white body barely distinguishable from the foam on the water's surface. The drainage channel was widening now, the current spreading out, which should have slowed it down. But Aspen was too tired to take advantage. His head dipped under again, stayed under longer. When he resurfaced this time, his eyes were closed. "He's giving up," Jude said, his voice hollow. "He's too tired to fight anymore." Evelyn lowered her binoculars. Her face streaked with tears she'd finally stopped trying to hide. She opened her mouth to call the all clear, to tell the team to prepare for body recovery protocols, when something made her freeze. The jungle had gone quiet again. Not the normal quiet of midday heat, but the unnatural silence that meant something was wrong. Something was watching. The birds had stopped calling. The insects had stopped buzzing. Even the howler monkeys had gone silent, which never happened unless a massive shape moved through the underbrush on the far bank, pushing aside branches that were as thick as a man's arm. Something large, something powerful, something that had been traveling parallel to the current, following Aspen's desperate journey downstream. Jude's camera swung toward the movement, his hand steadying as his instincts as a cameraman overrode his grief. Through his viewfinder, he caught a glimpse of dark fur, powerful shoulders, and eyes that were locked on the drowning cub with an intensity that made his breath catch. "What is that?" he whispered. The shape stepped into full view at the water's edge, not 30 feet from where Aspen floated, barely conscious. It was a bear. A spectacled bear, massive and dripping wet like he'd already been in the river. And he wasn't looking at the researchers or the roaring tiger on the ridge or anything else in the jungle. He was looking directly at Aspen. What do you think the bear does next? Comment below and hit that subscribe button, because what this bear does is something science can't explain. The bear didn't move. Not yet. He stood at the water's edge like a statue carved from shadow and muscle, his dark eyes tracking Aspen's limp body as it drifted closer. Water dripped from his fur in steady streams, pooling at his massive paws. He had been in the river already, recently, judging by how soaked he was. But why? And why was he here now, watching a dying tiger cub with an expression that almost looked like concern? "That's Maddox," Evelyn breathed, recognition flooding through her. "The bear who's been raiding our supply crates." Jude's camera zoomed in on the bear's face, capturing every detail. Maddox was enormous, easily 400 pounds, with the distinctive beige markings around his eyes that gave spectacled bears their name. But it was his eyes themselves that held Jude transfixed. They were focused, intelligent, calculating. This wasn't the lazy opportunist who stole breakfast mangoes. This was something else entirely. "Why isn't he attacking?" Roderick whispered. "I don't know," Evelyn said. "Spectacled bears are normally—" She cut off as the water around Aspen began to change again. The surface rippled in patterns that had nothing to do with the current, small, rapid disturbances that spread outward in expanding circles. Through the murky brown water, silver flashes appeared. Dozens of them, hundreds. The piranhas were returning. They'd fled before, scared off by some unknown presence, but fear only lasted so long when prey was in the water. And Aspen was wounded now. Small cuts from rocks and branches, nothing major, but enough. In the Amazon, enough was all it took. Jude's lens caught the moment the first school broke the surface, their bodies churning the water white as they converged on the cub's location. Aspen's eyes fluttered open, some deep survival instinct dragging him back to consciousness. He saw the fish, saw the foaming water, and managed one weak kick trying to propel himself away. The piranhas hit him like a wave. His body jerked in the water, and this time his cry was audible, a high, thin sound of pain and terror that carried across the river. The fish swarmed him, their razor teeth flashing, and the water around him began to churn violently. "No!" Jude shouted, his camera dropping from his eye. "God, no, please!" On the ridge, Kailani's roar reached a pitch that was almost a scream. She charged the edge again, paws tearing at the earth, trying to create a path where none existed. Nova bolted upright, her small body rigid, sensing her brother's pain even from this distance. Maddox tensed. Every muscle in his body coiled, his head lowering, his eyes narrowing. But he still didn't move. Not yet. He was waiting for something, watching something the researchers couldn't see. Then the water exploded. A caiman surfaced 10 feet from Aspen, massive and ancient, its armored body cutting through the piranha school like they were nothing. The fish scattered again, But this time they didn't flee. They circled, waiting, because they knew what was about to happen. The caiman was easily 12 feet long, its jaws powerful enough to shatter defenses, its movements deliberate and unhurried. It didn't need to rush. The cub wasn't going anywhere. "This can't be happening," Roderick said, his voice strangled. "This can't." But it was. The jungle was responding to Aspen's presence the way it responded to everything. With hunger. With efficiency. With the brutal mathematics of predator and prey that didn't care about cuteness or innocence or the fact that researchers were watching in horror from the bank. The caiman's eyes locked onto Aspen. Just the eyes visible above the water's surface, cold and reptilian and patient. It drifted closer, using the current to close the distance without expending energy. 20 feet away. 15. Its jaws opened slightly, revealing rows of interlocking teeth designed to grip and twist and drown. Aspen tried to swim, his small paws moving frantically, but he was going in circles now, disoriented by shock and exhaustion and terror. He couldn't see the caiman approaching from behind. Couldn't understand that his struggles were only drawing more attention, more predators, more death. Because there were more. Jude's camera panned left and caught movement in the tangled roots along the near bank. A familiar pattern of brown and black scales, thick coils sliding through the vegetation with soundless grace. The anaconda from earlier. It hadn't fled when Aspen fell. It had followed, tracking the disturbance in the water, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We've got an anaconda on the east bank," Jude reported, his voice mechanical, his training taking over even as his heart shattered. "Caiman approaching from downstream. Piranha schools on all sides. Subject is—" He swallowed hard. "Subject is compromised." Subject, like Aspen, was just data, just another observation to log. But using clinical language was the only way Jude could keep functioning, keep filming, keep his hands steady enough to document what was about to become a tragedy. The caiman was 5 feet away now, close enough that Aspen finally sensed it. The cub's head turned, his ice-blue eyes going wide, and he let out one more cry, weaker this time, barely more than a mew. He had nothing left, no strength to swim, no energy to fight. He was a 70-pound animal in a river that killed things 10 times his size every single day. The caiman's tail swished once, adjusting trajectory, and its jaws opened wider. On the far bank, Maddox's entire body went rigid. His lips pulled back, revealing teeth that were designed for grinding vegetation, not combat. His paws dug into the mud, claws extending. Every line of his body screamed readiness. But still he waited. What was he waiting for? Why wasn't he moving? The anaconda reached the water's edge, its head rising slightly, tongue flicking out to taste the air. It had a clear path to Aspen now. So did the caiman. The piranhas were circling tighter. 3 different predators, 3 different strategies, all converging on the same exhausted cub who had maybe 15 seconds of consciousness left. Kailani's roars had dissolved into something worse, a keening, broken sound that no animal should ever have to make, the sound of a mother watching her child fading away and being powerless to stop it. Evelyn's radio crackled. "Should we fire warning shots?" someone asked. "Scare off the predators?" Her finger hovered over the transmit button. Protocol said no. Never interfere with natural predator behavior. But this wasn't natural. This was a captive-bred tiger cub in a conservation enclosure that was supposed to be safe. and every instinct in her body was screaming to do something. Anything, even if it violated every rule she'd ever followed. "Evelyn?" The voice on the radio again. "Orders?" The caiman was 3 feet from Aspen now. 2 feet. Its jaws gaped wide enough to swallow the cub's head whole. Maddox's muscles bunched. His eyes locked onto the caiman with an intensity that was almost predatory, almost territorial. His body shifted forward, one massive paw lifting from the mud. And then everything happened at once. The anaconda struck from the left, its body whipping through the water with terrifying speed. The caiman lunged from the right, its jaws snapping shut on empty water where Aspen had been a split second before. The piranhas surged upward in a feeding frenzy, the water turning into a churning mass of silver and foam. Maddox charged into the river, not carefully, not cautiously. He launched himself off the bank with the full force of 400 pounds of muscle, hitting the water like a cannonball, his roar drowning out even Kailani's cries. Spray exploded in every direction. The current caught him immediately, but he powered through it, his massive paws churning, his eyes locked on one target and one target only. The drowning white cub who'd just disappeared beneath the surface for what might be the last time. Will Maddox reach Aspen in time? Or will the jungle claim another victim? Drop a comment below. Hit the subscribe button, like and share this story because you need to see what happens in the next 60 seconds. The water erupted around Maddox like a small explosion. His massive body crashed through the surface, sending waves radiating outward that knocked the nearest piranhas sideways. The caiman jerked back, startled by the sudden intrusion, its prehistoric brain calculating whether this new presence was threat or competition. The anaconda froze mid-strike, its body coiling tighter around the submerged roots, reassessing. For 3 heartbeats, everything in the river went still. Jude's camera shook as he zoomed in on Maddox's face, capturing the moment the bear's eyes locked onto Aspen's submerged form. The cub was sinking now, his small body limp, drifting deeper into the murky brown water where sunlight barely penetrated. Air bubbles rose from his nose in a thin stream, the last of his oxygen escaping, his lungs running on empty. "What is he doing?" Roderick whispered, his voice tight with confusion. Is he going after the cub?" Evelyn's binoculars were pressed so hard against her face they left red marks on her skin. "I don't know. Spectacled bears don't hunt prey this size. They're primarily herbivorous. Fruit, insects, occasional small mammals. They don't attack tiger cubs." "Then why?" "I don't know," Evelyn snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. "None of this makes sense." But it was making sense to Maddox, or at least something was driving him forward, some instinct or impulse or decision that overrode every natural behavior pattern his species had evolved over millions of years. He wasn't supposed to be here. Wasn't supposed to enter water this dangerous, this full of threats. Wasn't supposed to care about a tiger cub from a completely different species, a completely different continent, a completely different world. Yet here he was, paddling deeper into the current, his powerful front legs churning through the water, his eyes never leaving the spot where Aspen had disappeared. The researchers on the bank were frozen in disbelief. They'd been watching Maddox for weeks, studying him from a distance, documenting his raids on their supply crates, laughing at his brazen theft of mangoes and papayas left out to ripen. He was a nuisance, a clever opportunist who'd figured out that humans meant easy food. They'd nicknamed him the breakfast thief, and the fruit bandit, and treated him like a minor inconvenience rather than a serious research subject. But this Maddox was different. This Maddox was something they'd never seen before. His face was set with an intensity that bordered on rage, his lips pulled back from his teeth, his breathing harsh and labored as he fought the current. Every stroke was purposeful, powerful, driving him forward against water that was trying to sweep him downstream. He wasn't hunting. He wasn't scavenging. He was rescuing. "He's actually trying to save him," Jude breathed, his camera trembling. "He's trying to save Aspen." Kailani had stopped roaring. She stood motionless on the ridge, her white body rigid, her eyes locked on the bear in the water below. Every instinct in her body should have been screaming at her to see this as a threat. A predator approaching her cub. A competitor moving in for an easy strike. Bears and tigers were natural enemies in regions where their territories overlapped. They fought over food, over space, over dominance. But something in Maddox's body language was wrong for an attack. His posture wasn't aggressive. His movements weren't predatory. He was desperate, frantic even, moving with the single-minded focus of an animal who'd made a decision and refused to reconsider, no matter the cost. The caiman had recovered from its initial shock. It swung its massive head toward Maddox, jaws opening in a warning display, asserting its claim to the prey. 12 feet of armored reptile, weighing close to 500 pounds, protecting its territory against an intruder who had no business being there. Maddox didn't even look at it. His eyes stayed locked on the water where Aspen had sunk, and he dove. The bear's entire body disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only ripples and the shocked silence of the research team. Jude's camera stayed fixed on the water, his finger white-knuckled on the record button, filming nothing but brown current and scattered piranha. 5 seconds passed. 10. "How long can he hold his breath?" Roderick asked. "I don't know," Evelyn said. "Spectacled bears are strong swimmers, but they're not aquatic. 30 seconds, 40. "And the cub?" Evelyn didn't answer. They both knew Aspen had been under for almost a minute now. Even if Maddox reached him, even if the bear somehow managed to grab him and surface, the cub might already be gone. Water in the lungs. Brain damage from oxygen deprivation. Small bodies gave up faster than large ones. The caiman circled the area where both bear and cub had disappeared, its tail sweeping back and forth, agitated. The anaconda remained coiled in the roots, watching, waiting. The piranhas had scattered to the edges, sensing that this situation had become too chaotic, too unpredictable for a safe feeding opportunity. 15 seconds, 20. Nova mewed from the ridge, a small, questioning sound directed at her mother. Kailani didn't respond. She was barely breathing, her entire focus locked on the water below. 25 seconds. 30. "Come on," Jude whispered. "Come on, come on, come on." The water directly above where they'd disappeared began to churn. Not from the current, from something underneath, thrashing, struggling. Bubbles broke the surface, large ones, and then Maddox erupted from the river like a breaching whale. Water cascading off his dark fur, his jaws clamped around something small and white and utterly limp. Aspen. The bear had him by the scruff of his neck, the way a mother cat carries a kitten, holding the cub's head above water even as his own face dipped below the surface. Maddox's eyes were wild, showing white around the edges, his breathing ragged as he fought to keep them both afloat. The current was merciless, trying to tear them apart, trying to drag them both under. The caiman saw the bear's vulnerability and struck Thok. It came from Maddox's blind side, jaws gaping, moving with the explosive speed that made caimans one of the Amazon's apex predators. Its teeth were aimed at the bear's shoulder. A devastating bite that would end the rescue instantly, force Maddox to release the cub, turn this rescue into a double tragedy. But Maddox sensed it somehow. Maybe he felt the displacement of water. Maybe some ancient prey instinct kicked in. Whatever the reason, he twisted at the last possible second, bringing his free paw around in a massive swipe that connected with the caiman's snout, with a sound like a thunderclap against the water. The impact sent the reptile spinning sideways, stunning it, buying Maddox 3 precious seconds. He used them to power toward the bank, his legs churning, Aspen's limp body still clenched in his jaws. But the cub wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. His ice-blue eyes were closed, his small body hanging like a rag doll. "He's not breathing," Jude said, his voice hollow. "Evelyn, the cub's not breathing." The anaconda chose that moment to strike. It exploded from the roots where it had been hiding. Its body whipping through the air, fangs bared, aiming for Maddox's exposed back leg. If that strike connected, and those coils wrapped around the bear's body, both Maddox and Aspen would be dragged under. Anacondas claimed prey by constriction and drowning. They were patient. They were relentless. They didn't miss. The anaconda's fangs missed Maddox's leg by inches. The bear twisted his body mid-stroke, using the current's momentum to spin away from the strike, and the snake's jaws snapped shut on empty water. Its massive body splashed down behind him, coils thrashing in frustration, already repositioning for another attempt, but Maddox wasn't waiting around. He powered forward with renewed desperation, his hind legs kicking so hard they created whirlpools in his wake. Aspen remained motionless in his jaws, a small, white bundle that seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. The cub's head lolled to one side, water streaming from his nose and mouth, his legs dangling limply. He looked gone. Everything about his body said lifeless. The complete lack of muscle tone, the way his paws dragged through the water without even a reflexive twitch. The eerie stillness that came when a life force simply stopped. Jude's camera zoomed in on the cub's face, capturing the closed eyes, the slack jaw. "He's gone," he whispered. "Maddox is carrying a lifeless cub." "We don't know that," Evelyn said, but her voice carried no conviction. She'd seen enough drowned animals to recognize the signs. Even if Aspen's heart was still beating, and that was a massive if, the amount of water in his lungs, the time he'd spent without oxygen, the damage might be irreversible. But Maddox didn't seem to care about statistics or survival odds or medical reality. He just kept swimming, his powerful shoulders driving him forward against a current that would have stopped a smaller animal instantly. His breathing was labored now, harsh gasps that blew spray from his nostrils, his body burning through energy at an unsustainable rate. Bears were strong swimmers, but this was beyond swimming. This was war against the river itself. The caiman had recovered from Maddox's initial swat. It circled back, more cautious now, reassessing this opponent who'd proven capable of fighting back. The reptile's prehistoric brain ran simple calculations. Effort versus reward. Risk versus hunger. The bear was large, dangerous, fighting with unexpected ferocity. But there were 2 prey items now, the bear and the cub. And one of them wasn't moving. It came in low this time, using the murky water for cover, approaching from downstream where the current would help its momentum. Its tail propelled it forward in rapid sweeps, closing the distance in seconds. Maddox didn't see it coming. His eyes were fixed on the bank ahead, on the tangle of roots that might offer purchase, might offer escape. The caiman's jaws opened wide, aiming for Maddox's hindquarters. On the ridge, Kailani exploded into motion. She had been frozen before, paralyzed by helplessness, but something about seeing her cub in another predator's jaws, even if that predator was trying to save him, triggered every maternal instinct she possessed. She roared and charged down the ridge, no longer caring about the impossible terrain, no longer calculating odds. If the drop was fatal, so be it. Her cub needed her. The sound of her roar carried across the water, a primal warning that made every animal in the vicinity freeze. Including the caiman, its attack hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Maddox to sense the displacement of water behind him and spin. What happened next happened so fast that Jude's camera barely caught it. Maddox released Aspen. The cub's body splashed into the water, and for one horrifying moment, it looked like the bear had given up, abandoned his rescue attempt. But Maddox wasn't giving up. He was adapting. With his jaws free, he had full range of motion, and he used it. His entire body pivoted, bringing his massive paw around in an arc that connected with the caiman's head with devastating force. The sound was like a thunderclap, a sharp, powerful crack that echoed across the river. The caiman's head snapped sideways, its body going rigid, stunned by the impact. Maddox didn't wait to see if it would recover. He grabbed Aspen again, his jaws finding the scruff of the cub's neck on the first try, and surged toward the bank with everything he had left. His front paws found purchase on a submerged log. He hauled himself forward, claws digging into rotting wood, his back legs still churning in the current. The anaconda made one more attempt, its body whipping through the water. But Maddox was moving too fast now, driven by something beyond exhaustion, beyond pain, beyond rational thought. 10 feet from the bank. 5 feet. The current intensified, trying one last time to reclaim its prey. It slammed against Maddox's side, threatening to tear his grip loose from the log, to send both bear and cub tumbling back downstream into water that would finish what it started. Maddox's claws screamed against wood, slipping, catching, slipping again. His back legs found the riverbed, not stable ground, soft mud that his paws sank into, but something, enough to push off. He lunged forward with the last reserves of his strength, dragging Aspen through the shallows, up the slight incline where the bank rose from the water. They collapsed together in the mud, both of them utterly still. Maddox's sides heaved, his breathing ragged and wet-sounding. Water streamed from his fur, pooling around his massive body. His eyes were half closed, his legs splayed out like he'd forgotten how to stand. Aspen lay beside him, perfectly motionless. No breathing, no movement, nothing. Jude's camera captured every detail. The cub's saturated fur plastered to his small frame, making him look even tinier than he was. The way his ribcage remained stubbornly still, refusing to rise and fall. The blue tint around his nose and paw pads that spoke of oxygen deprivation. "He's gone," Roderick said flatly. The cub didn't make it. Evelyn's radio crackled. "Should we move in? Try to resuscitate?" Her finger hovered over the transmit button again, but this time she wasn't calculating protocol. She was calculating futility. They were 60 yards from that bank, separated by steep terrain and thick vegetation. By the time they reached Aspen, It would be too late. It was probably already too late. On the ridge, Kailani had reached the bottom of the steep descent, her white coat streaked with mud and dark stains from dozens of small cuts. She stood 20 feet from where Maddox lay with her cub, her body coiled tight, every muscle tensed. Her eyes locked onto the bear with an intensity that made even the researchers nervous. This was the moment where instinct would override everything else. Maddox was vulnerable, exhausted, barely conscious. Aspen was right there, lying in the mud. A mother tiger protecting her young could cover 20 feet in less than 2 seconds. Could end the fight with a single, decisive strike. Maddox lifted his head slowly, his eyes meeting Kailani's. He didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth, didn't make any gesture of dominance or aggression. He just looked at her, and in that look was something the researchers couldn't quite define. Understanding, maybe, or acknowledgement, or simply exhaustion so profound that even fear had become irrelevant. Then Maddox did something that made Jude's hands shake so badly he nearly dropped the camera. He lowered his head to Aspen's small body and gently, impossibly gently, for an animal with jaws powerful enough to shatter defenses, pressed his nose against the cub's chest. Once, twice, 3 times. Each push was firm, rhythmic, deliberate. "Is he?" Jude's voice cracked. "Is he doing chest compressions?" It was impossible. Bears didn't know CPR. Bears didn't understand respiratory distress or oxygen deprivation or any of the principles that made resuscitation work. Yet Maddox kept pressing, his massive head pushing against Aspen's tiny ribcage in a pattern that looked disturbingly purposeful. Press, release, press, release. Kailani took 1 step closer, her growl deepening. Maddox kept pressing. Aspen's body jerked. Did that actually just happen? Or are we seeing what we want to see? Let us know in the comments below and share this, because what happens in the next 10 seconds defies everything we know about nature. Water erupted from Aspen's mouth. Not a gentle trickle, a violent expulsion that sprayed across the mud, clear river water mixed with bile and dark fluid. The cub's entire body convulsed, his small rib cage heaving as his lungs fought to expel the liquid that had been drowning him from the inside. His legs kicked reflexively, claws extended, scratching at nothing as his nervous system rebooted in panic. Then he gasped. A horrible, rattling sound that seemed to scrape up from somewhere deep in his chest. His eyes flew open, those striking ice-blue eyes now red-rimmed and unfocused, and he gasped again, dragging air into lungs that weren't sure they remembered how to use it. Unbelievable, Jude breathed, his camera shaking so badly the footage would be almost unusable. Look at that, he's alive, he's breathing. Evelyn, he's breathing! But Evelyn wasn't looking at Aspen anymore. She was looking at Kailani, and what she saw there made her go ice cold. The mother tiger had closed half the distance between herself and Maddox. Her body was low to the ground now, shoulders hunched, every line of her posture screaming attack readiness. Her lips were pulled back from teeth that could puncture a skull with one bite. Her eyes were locked not on her cub, but on the bear who held him. Because Maddox had grabbed Aspen again. The moment the cub started coughing, the moment his small body began convulsing, Maddox had gently, so impossibly gently, taken him by the scruff again, lifting him, securing him. The action was protective, maternal almost, but to a tiger whose cub had just been underwater for 90 seconds, whose maternal instincts were screaming that everything here was threat, everything here was danger. It looked like something else entirely. It looked like a predator claiming prey. Kailani's growl went subsonic, a sound felt more than heard, vibrating through the ground itself. She took another step forward, her muscles coiling. Maddox was vulnerable, exhausted, barely able to stand. One leap, one bite. She could end him before he even knew she was moving. Maddox lifted his head. Aspen still clenched gently in his jaws, and met her eyes. He didn't back away, didn't show submission, but he didn't show aggression either. He just stood there in the mud, swaying slightly from exhaustion, holding her fading cub who was now somehow, impossibly breathing again. Aspen coughed again, weaker this time. And a thin stream of water dribbled from his nose. His eyes were closing, his brief surge of consciousness already fading. He wasn't out of danger, not even close. Hypothermia, aspiration pneumonia, oxygen deprivation damage to his brain. The list of things that could still claim him was long and brutal, but he was breathing. And Maddox was still holding him, still protecting him, even as a 500-pound tiger prepared to tear him apart for doing so. "She's going to attack," Roderick whispered, his hand moving toward the tranquilizer rifle they kept for emergencies. "Evelyn, she's going to hurt him." "Don't!" Evelyn's hand shot out, stopping Roderick from reaching the weapon. "Wait." "Wait for what? For her to—" "Just wait." Because something was happening that none of them had ever seen before. Something that made Evelyn's scientific training war with the evidence of her own eyes. Kailani was hesitating. Not from fear. There was nothing in her posture that suggested fear. She could end Maddox in seconds if she wanted to. But she was watching him, studying him. And in her eyes was something that looked disturbingly like recognition, understanding. As if some part of her predator brain was processing what this bear had just done, calculating the energy he'd expended, the risks he'd taken, the impossibility of his actions. He'd saved her cub. An animal from a different species, a different continent, a different evolutionary path entirely, had risked his life to save her baby. The current in the drainage channel surged suddenly, swollen by some upstream influx, and the water level rose 6 inches in a matter of seconds. It washed over the bank where Maddox stood, reaching his legs, threatening to drag him back in. He stumbled, his exhausted body nearly giving out, and Aspen slipped from his jaws. The cub's small body tumbled toward the water. Maddox lunged, his reflexes somehow still functioning despite his exhaustion. He caught Aspen before the current could reclaim him, but the movement cost him his balance. His front legs went out from under him, and suddenly both bear and cub were sliding back down the muddy incline, back toward the brown water that had nearly taken them both. Jude's camera followed their descent, capturing the moment Maddox's claws found purchase on a thick root emerging from the bank. He held on with one paw, his body stretched between the root and the current, Aspen still clenched in his jaws. His back legs churned in the water, trying to find the bottom, trying to push them back up the slope. But the current was too strong, and Maddox was too tired. His claws began to slip. Kailani moved, not in attack, in something else entirely. She charged down the last section of bank and positioned herself at the top of the incline, directly above where Maddox struggled. Her powerful jaws opened, and for one terrible moment, everyone thought she was going for a critical bite. Instead, she grabbed the scruff of Maddox's neck, the same way a mother carries a cub, the same way Maddox had been carrying Aspen. She bit down, not hard enough to puncture, but firm enough to grip, and began backing up, using her superior position and leverage to haul both bear and cub away from the water's edge. "What is happening?" Jude's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are we seeing right now?" Evelyn couldn't answer, couldn't process what her eyes were showing her. A tiger and a bear, natural enemies, working together to save a drowning cub. It violated every principle of behavioral ecology she'd ever learned, violated every understanding of interspecies interaction. This didn't happen. This couldn't happen. But it was happening. Kailani dragged them 3 feet up the bank, her neck muscles straining with effort, her back legs driving into the mud for traction. Maddox's weight combined with Aspen's was enormous, but she was motivated by something more powerful than physics. She pulled them another 2 feet, another 3. Then she released Maddox and immediately grabbed Aspen, pulling her cub from the bear's jaws with a gentleness that contradicted her earlier aggression. She backed away quickly, positioning herself between Aspen and Maddox, her body language shifting back to protective mode now that her baby was in her possession. Aspen hung limply in her jaws, still breathing but barely conscious. Water continued to drain from his nose. His small body shivered violently, shock and hypothermia setting in fast. Maddox collapsed completely, his body splaying out in the mud, his sides heaving. He made no move to follow, no attempt to reclaim the cub. He just lay there, watching as Kailani carried Aspen away from the water's edge, away from danger, back toward the ridge where Nova waited. The 2 animals locked eyes one more time across the muddy bank. Kailani with her rescued cub. Maddox with his exhausted body barely functioning. Some communication passed between them, something wordless and primal that the researchers would spend years trying to interpret and never fully understand. Then Kailani turned and began climbing back towards the ridge, Aspen secure in her jaws, moving carefully now, each step deliberate. Nova appeared at the top, mewing frantically, rushing down to meet her mother and brother. On the bank below, Maddox watched them go. His eyes were half closed, his breathing still labored. The caiman had retreated to deeper water, unwilling to risk another confrontation. The anaconda had disappeared back into the root system. The piranhas had dispersed. The river flowed on, indifferent to the drama that had played out in its waters, already forgetting the white cub who'd almost become just another statistic in the Amazon's brutal mathematics. Jude's camera panned between Kailani climbing the ridge with her cubs and Maddox lying motionless in the mud below. Is Maddox going to be okay?" Evelyn raised her binoculars, studying the bear's breathing pattern, his muscle tone, his level of consciousness. "I don't know. He's in shock, hypothermia, exhaustion. He expended more energy than any animal his size should be able to survive." "So, what do?" "We watch," Evelyn said quietly. "And we document. And we try to understand what the hell we just witnessed." But even as she said it, she knew documentation would never capture what had really happened here. Some things couldn't be reduced to data points and behavioral observations. Some things existed in the space between instinct and choice, between survival and sacrifice, between what animals were supposed to be and what they chose to become. Maddox's eyes closed completely. His breathing slowed. For several long seconds, he didn't move at all. Then, with visible effort, he rolled onto his stomach and began dragging himself toward the forest, away from the water, away from the tigers, away from the researchers who'd witnessed his impossible act. He moved slowly, his legs barely functioning, his body leaving a trail in the mud. But he moved. One paw forward, then another, heading back into the jungle that had birthed him, carrying with him a secret that would challenge everything science thought it knew about animal behavior. Before we continue, you and most people watching right now might never see another video from this channel, all because you forgot to subscribe. So please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. It is literally the only way you tell me that the hours researching, writing, and editing these stories was worth it. Now, let's get back to the story. Maddox made it 30 feet before his legs gave out completely. He collapsed in a patch of ferns at the forest's edge, his massive body hitting the ground with a thud that sent birds scattering from nearby branches. His sides heaved with the effort of breathing, each exhale producing a wet, rattling sound that made Evelyn's medical training scream warnings about fluid in the lungs. His dark fur was plastered to his body, making him look smaller somehow, more vulnerable, stripped of the powerful presence he'd projected just minutes before. Jude's camera tracked his descent, capturing every labored breath, every tremor that ran through his exhausted muscles. "He's not going to make it, is he?" Jude asked, his voice hollow. "I don't know," Evelyn admitted, already calculating distances and response times. "If we intervene now, we might be able to stabilize him, get fluids in him, warm him up, monitor for aspiration pneumonia." "But protocol says—" "I know what protocol says." Evelyn's voice cracked. "No interference with natural animal behavior. No medical intervention unless the animal's condition was directly caused by human activity. But this—" She gestured helplessly at the scene below. "How do we classify this? Maddox chose to enter that water, chose to risk his life. There was no human interference, no equipment failure, no—" She stopped as Maddox's head lifted slightly, his eyes focusing on something across the clearing. Kailani had reached the top of the ridge. She stood silhouetted against the morning sky, Aspen still clenched gently in her jaws, Nova pressed against her side. The mother tiger's body was tense, alert, every sense focused on the bear who'd saved her cub and was now dying at the forest's edge. For a long moment, nobody moved. The entire jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then Kailani began descending again. "What is she doing?" Roderick whispered. "She's got her cub. She's safe. Why is she going back down?" Evelyn adjusted her binoculars, her hands shaking slightly. "I have no idea." Kailani moved carefully, each step deliberate, keeping Aspen secure in her jaws. Nova followed close behind, confused but trusting her mother's judgment. They descended the ridge slowly, navigating the same treacherous terrain that had prevented Kailani from reaching the water in time, but moving with purpose now, with direction, toward Maddox. The bear's eyes tracked her approach, but he made no move to rise. No attempt to flee or defend himself. He was beyond that now, his body having given everything it had and then some. If Kailani wanted to finish him, he couldn't stop her, wouldn't even be able to put up a fight. Jude's camera zoomed in on Kailani's face, trying to read her expression, trying to predict what was about to happen. Her lips were pulled back slightly, showing teeth, but the growl that rumbled from her chest wasn't the same aggressive warning from before. It was something else. Lower, quieter, almost questioning. She stopped 15 feet from where Maddox lay, her eyes locked on his. Aspen hung limply in her jaws, still breathing but unconscious now, his small body finally surrendering to the trauma it had endured. Water still dripped from his fur, forming small puddles in the grass below. Kailani carefully lowered Aspen to the ground, positioning him between her front paws where she could guard him completely. Nova immediately pressed against her brother, making small, worried sounds, trying to wake him with gentle paw taps to his face. Then Kailani did something that made every researcher on the observation deck forget to breathe. She took 3 steps toward Maddox, close enough that she could reach him in one leap, close enough that her breath would be visible on cold mornings, close enough that there was no misunderstanding her intention. She was approaching deliberately, consciously, making a choice. Maddox's eyes widened slightly, the only indication that he registered the danger. His claws flexed once, instinctively, but he didn't rise, didn't growl, didn't make any gesture of threat or submission. He just watched her approach with an expression that looked disturbingly like acceptance. Kailani stopped 5 feet away. This close, the size difference was striking. She was easily twice his weight, her head level with his shoulder, even though he was lying down. One swipe of her paw would end the confrontation instantly. One bite to his skull would end him. She lowered her head, sniffing the air between them. Her nose twitched, processing scents, gathering information the way all animals did. She could smell the river water on his fur, the exhaustion in his sweat, the stress hormones flooding his system. But she could also smell something else. The scent of her cub on his breath, on his face, transferred during those desperate minutes when he'd carried Aspen through the water. The growl in her chest faded, stopped completely. And in the silence that followed, something passed between them that Jude's camera couldn't capture, that Evelyn's binoculars couldn't magnify, that no amount of scientific observation could fully quantify. Understanding. Recognition. Some wordless acknowledgement that transcended species, transcended evolution, transcended everything they were supposed to be to each other. Kailani took 1 step back, then another. Her eyes never left Maddox's face, but her body language shifted, the tension bleeding out of her shoulders, her tail lowering, her posture opening. She wasn't retreating in fear. She was giving space, offering safe passage. Maddox's head lowered to the ground, his eyes closing briefly, exhaustion or gratitude or simple relief, impossible to tell. When he opened them again, he began the agonizing process of standing. His front legs shook violently as they took his weight. His back legs nearly buckled twice, but he stood, swaying like a tree in a high wind, his breath coming in harsh gasps. He looked at Kailani 1 more time, then at Aspen, still unconscious between his mother's paws. The cub's sides rose and fell steadily, shallow breaths, but regular, alive. Maddox turned toward the forest and began walking. Each step looked like it cost him everything he had left, his paws dragging slightly, his head hanging low. But he walked, away from the tigers, away from the river, away from the research camp and the humans who documented his impossible act. Kailani watched him go, her body still relaxed and making no move to follow or threaten. Nova mewed quietly, confused by her mother's behavior, but Kailani ignored her. Her eyes stayed locked on the bear until he disappeared into the dense undergrowth, swallowed by shadows and ferns and the endless green chaos of the jungle. Only then did she turn back to her cubs, lowering her head to carefully check Aspen's breathing, to lick water from his face, to warm his small body with her own. On the observation deck, nobody spoke. Jude's camera kept rolling, capturing the aftermath, but his face was wet with tears he'd stopped trying to hide. Roderick had both hands pressed to his mouth, his eyes wide with disbelief. Evelyn lowered her binoculars slowly, her scientific mind trying and failing to process what she'd just witnessed. "Did that—" Roderick started, then stopped. "Did that actually just happen?" "I don't know," Evelyn whispered. "I mean, yes, obviously yes. We all saw it, the cameras recorded it. But it's impossible," Jude finished. "It's not impossible," Evelyn said slowly, her brain starting to reboot, starting to shift from shocked witness to analyzing scientist. "It happened. We watched it happen, which means our understanding of interspecies behavior is—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Wrong. Incomplete. Something." Her radio crackled. "Dr. Rhodes, should we send a team to track the bear? Check his condition?" Evelyn's finger hovered over the transmit button, professional responsibility warring with something else. A sense that Maddox had earned the right to disappear without human interference. That whatever had just happened here existed in a space beyond their protocols and procedures. "No," she said finally. "Let him go. But set up camera traps along his usual routes. If he's—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If he needs help, we'll know." She switched off the radio and turned to Jude. "Tell me you got all of that." "Every second," Jude said, his voice shaking, "from the moment he entered the water until he disappeared into the forest. It's all here." "Good." Evelyn looked back at the ridge where Kailani lay with her cubs, grooming Aspen with focused intensity, trying to warm him, to comfort him, to bring him fully back to consciousness. "Because no one is going to believe this. Hell, I watched it happen and I don't believe it." But belief didn't matter. The footage was real. The mud churned by their struggle was real. The water still dripping from Aspen's fur was real, and somewhere in the jungle, a bear who should be dead was walking away from an act that would haunt researchers and challenge scientific understanding for years to come. Nova suddenly perked up, her small head lifting, her ears swiveling toward the forest where Maddox had disappeared. She mewed, not in fear, but in something that sounded almost like goodbye. Aspen opened his eyes 3 hours later. Jude's camera caught the moment. The slow flutter of ice-blue irises, the confused blink as consciousness returned, the small mew of discomfort that made Kailani's entire body tense with relief. The cub was lying pressed against his mother's belly, Nova curled protectively on his other side, both of them sharing their body heat to combat the hypothermia that had nearly claimed him. He tried to stand and immediately collapsed, his legs still too weak, his body still processing the trauma. But he was alert now, aware, his eyes tracking movement around him with growing clarity. He was going to survive. "Thank God," Jude whispered, lowering his camera for the first time in hours. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard from emotional exhaustion. "Thank God." Evelyn was already on her radio, coordinating with the veterinary team, arranging for remote monitoring, discussing antibiotics and observation protocols. But even as she spoke, part of her mind was elsewhere, replaying what she'd witnessed, trying to fit it into frameworks that kept rejecting it, kept insisting it couldn't have happened the way she'd seen it happen. The footage hit the research community like a bomb. Within 24 hours, Evelyn's preliminary report had been forwarded to behavioral ecologists, zoologists, and wildlife biologists across 3 continents. Within 48 hours, her inbox contained over 300 requests for the raw video footage. Within 72 hours, the debate had exploded into full academic warfare. "It's anthropomorphization," insisted Dr. Helen Park from Stanford, her voice sharp over the video conference. "You're projecting human motivations onto instinctive behavior. The bear was likely after the cub as prey, and the rescue was coincidental." "Then explain the chest compressions," Evelyn shot back, her patience wearing thin after the 5th consecutive call, arguing the same points. Explain why Maddox didn't attempt to eat Aspen when he had multiple opportunities. Explain the exchange with Kailani at the end. Coincidence, misinterpretation, confirmation bias. "We have 4 camera angles," Jude interjected, his voice tight. 90 minutes of continuous footage. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate, purposeful action. The scientific community remained divided, but the footage kept circulating, kept generating discussions, kept forcing researchers to confront possibilities they'd spent careers dismissing. Interspecies altruism, cross-species empathy, behaviors that suggested consciousness, choice, something beyond the mechanical response of instinct and evolution. Evelyn submitted her formal proposal 2 weeks later. Observational study of interspecies mutualism behaviors in shared habitat environments. It requested funding for long-term monitoring, advanced camera systems, behavioral analysis teams. It proposed a fundamental shift in how researchers approached animal interaction studies. It was approved within a month. Jude's contribution was simpler, but somehow more profound. He stood at the bend in the drainage channel where Maddox had made his stand, where the current had nearly claimed both bear and cub, and planted a small marker in the mud. "Maddox Bend?" he said quietly, his camera filming the hand-carved sign. "So people remember. So we never forget what happened here." Aspen recovered slowly but completely. The aspiration pneumonia that Evelyn had feared never materialized. The hypothermia resolved. Even the small cuts from rocks and fish bites healed without infection. Within 2 weeks, he was playing with Nova again, though he showed a newfound caution around water that suggested he remembered something of his ordeal. But something had changed between the cubs. Nova stayed closer now, more protective, as if she understood how close she'd come to losing her brother. And Aspen showed a boldness that hadn't existed before, like surviving the impossible had taught him that fear was negotiable, that the world could be survived even when it tried to end you. Kailani watched her cubs with an intensity that never wavered. But sometimes, when the morning light filtered through the canopy just right, when the wind carried certain scents from the forest, she would lift her head and stare toward the trees where Maddox had disappeared. The bear himself was spotted twice more over the following weeks, always at a distance, always moving through the forest with the same purposeful confidence he'd shown before. The camera traps caught him once, drinking from a stream 3 miles from camp, his body showing no visible signs of lasting injury. He'd survived his impossible act, just as Aspen had survived his impossible ordeal. They never interacted again. Maddox kept to his territory, Kailani to hers, the way nature intended. But the memory of what had passed between them remained, captured in 90 minutes of footage that would be analyzed, debated, and referenced for decades to come. Evelyn stood at the observation deck on the morning of her departure, 3 months after the rescue, watching Aspen play in the early sunlight. He was stronger now, bigger. his white coat gleaming as he wrestled with Nova near the stream, though notably never quite as close to the edge as before. "What do you think it means?" Jude asked, appearing beside her with his ever-present camera. "All of it. What Maddox did, what we saw." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, watching the cubs, thinking about the bear who'd risked everything for a creature he had no reason to save. "I think," she said slowly, "it means heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. I think it means nature has layers of complexity we're only beginning to understand. And I think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think it means the jungle protects itself in ways we can't explain. Ways that don't fit our models or our theories. Ways that maybe aren't meant to fit." Jude nodded. Filming the cubs, the forest, the morning light turning everything gold. "You think Maddox knew? That he understood what he was doing?" "I think Maddox made a choice," Evelyn said. "And that choice means more than any paper I could ever write." Somewhere in the forest, beyond the enclosure and the research camp and the boundaries of human understanding, a spectacled bear moved through morning shadows, carrying with him a secret that science would spend years trying to decode. And in the river that had nearly claimed them both, the current flowed on, indifferent and eternal, already forgetting the day it was defeated by something it couldn't measure. Sometimes nature reveals itself in moments that defy explanation. Sometimes the impossible happens, and we're left with nothing but questions and footage and the lingering sense that we witnessed something sacred. This was one of those times. If this story moved you, if you believe the world needs to hear about Maddox and Aspen, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video. Share it everywhere. Because stories like this, real stories that challenge everything we think we know, only survive if people like you spread them. We work tirelessly to bring you these incredible moments, and your support is literally what keeps us going. Don't let this story disappear. Make sure the world remembers the day a bear became a hero. Subscribe, share. Comment below with what you think Maddox was thinking in that moment. We read every single one, and your voice matters. This is just the beginning, but only if you're with us.